Good afternoon. My name is Dan Raposa. I'm a Triple Crown grad of UNH, serving on the alumni board. And I want you to know that the UNH Alumni Association is really the bedrock of our community here in Durham. Thank you for supporting the UNH effort with your time today. We encourage you to take advantage of all your Wildcat benefits by visiting the UNH Alumni Relations website at unh.edu/alumni. Today's webinar is entitled From Durham to Foxboro, A Journey to the Patriots. It's another episode in the webinar series presented by the UNH Alumni Relations Office. This afternoon, we're joined by Chad Graff, class of 2012, who will be interviewed by Mike McCann, professor and director of the Sports and Entertainment Law Institute at UNH Franklin Pierce Law School. Chad joined the Athletic in January of 2018 after covering a bit of everything for the St. Paul Pioneer Press. His other experiences include the Philadelphia Inquirer, the New England Sports Network, the Union Leader, the Boston Globe. As a student, he led the New Hampshire as their managing and executive editor. During his time there, TNH won a Pacemaker Award for General Excellence, college's Pulitzer Prize for Journalism. He will be interviewed today by Mike McCann. Mike is one of the nation's leading experts in sports law. He is a best-selling author and accomplished legal scholar. Mike and former NBA player Ed O'Bannon co-authored Court Justice, the Inside Story of My Battle Against the NCAA. He is also an award-winning journalist, and in 2020, he joined the staff of Portico. After the interview, Chad and Mike will certainly answer questions throughout the webinar, so please note your Q&As in the box at the bottom of your screen where you can submit your questions throughout the program. And with that, I am going to turn this over to Mike to get things started. Good afternoon, Mike.
Good afternoon, Dan. Thanks so much for that great introduction. It's great to be part of today's event. It should be a lot of fun to talk with Chad about his experience at UNH and his work now covering the Patriots. Looks like, let me get my video back on. Hold on. I think my video has been disabled, but that's okay. Oh, here we go. Now I've been brought back. You don't really need to see me, trust me. But if you must, I'm back. Chad, first of all, it's great to talk to you today. And maybe you could, as a starting question, talk about your time at UNH and what you learned about journalism and how the school helped you prepare for this career.
Yeah, gosh. So I enrolled at UNH in 2009. Unfortunately, took the path of graduating a semester early. If there's something I regret, I wish I stayed and maybe did a triple crown like Dan or stayed for a couple more years. Loved my time at UNH, loved my time in college, the people I met. the kind of work that we did. So I was an English/journalism major because there's not a defined journalism program at UNH. So I did both English and journalism and spent the vast majority of my time, perhaps to my professor's chagrin, not always in the classroom, but at the New Hampshire office in the MUB downstairs. I'm sure people have seen it and passed it. That was kind of where me and a group of 12, 15 of us spent close to every waking hour, it felt like, staying till 4 a.m. for production nights and getting the twice a week newspaper out there. Covered UNH hockey and football, but also switched just to, I don't know, kind of do more of the overall scene there. So loved my time at TNH, which led to a couple of internships, which frankly is what led to getting to do this kind of silly job that I have.
Maybe we could talk about those internships, Chad, because at UNH, the College of Liberal Arts, my understanding is 68% of students in it will have an internship before they graduate. It's really an astounding statistic and a credit to the office there. I know that there's an Office of Career and Professional Success that works with each student, and to hear that kind of number is really impressive. And my understanding is about half of them are paid. I know the school wants to make it so more are paid, but half is a pretty good number. Maybe you could talk about how you secured an internship and how it was a point of distinction from being in class, what you learned in the internship versus the class.
Yeah, so a few things. I think just kind of reflecting on it this morning, the internships were so important, I think, for me and for other COLA students and those in the liberal arts, because you can't really fake it as an intern in the College of Liberal Arts doing the kind of studies that we're doing and the internships that we're doing. So when, as students, you'd come back from the summer and everybody's all excited to talk about what they did and go to the new classes and stuff. My friends who are in business still love them. Their internships, they came back and like, yeah, I just kind of got coffee and sat and didn't really do much. And yet everybody I know who was in COLA and did an internship came back and was like, that was so intense. I learned a million different things because I was thrown right into the fire. That was my experience too. I somehow landed an internship at the Philadelphia Inquirer, and newspapers, certainly now, but definitely 10 years ago as well, didn't have the time or space or resources to just have you sit around and read a little bit and hope that's what got you better. You had to go out and do stuff. So I was interviewing Andy Reid and the Eagles, or the World Series team with the Phillies and Ryan Howard and all that. I think in COLA, that internship experience is so important, not just for your resume, but also, just because of the work that you're doing is so different from what you're learning in the class, and getting that hands-on experience is so important. I also think it's super hard in COLA to get these internships. Me and Tom Gownley at the time was also at the New Hampshire looking at similar internships. Those internships were so competitive that we kept getting rejected. And we ended up making a wall at TNH of all of our internship rejections to see who ended up having more, just because it felt like you had to apply to 20 internships just to get one yes. And so I think anything that we can do to help students perhaps not have to get 20 rejections in order to get a yes would make a big difference. And as you mentioned, having those be paid internships just makes it so much more equitable. Otherwise, it kind of just favors the students who come from a situation where they can afford to go do an unpaid internship, often in a city that's expensive to live or a place where they don't have housing. So those paid internships are so important. The whole reason that I'm here now is because that Philly internship where it's not like they're paying a ton, but it was enough to sublet a room at UPenn and hang out there and kind of get to experience what life was like as a sports reporter for the Philadelphia Inquirer.
And I would imagine, especially in journalism, where actual experience is such a valued element of somebody's application for a job in journalism, that experience with the Philadelphia Inquirer probably really played a key role in your ability to kind of progress after you graduated. And when you did graduate, you had the Inquirer experience and the New Hampshire and some coursework. You felt that you were well prepared to enter journalism?
I was, and I do think, I loved my time at UNH and what I learned in the classroom, but it was really that experience doing weekend shifts at the Globe, doing the internship in Philly, doing the internship at Nesson. Like those were the things that taught you what you're going to be doing, once you graduate and go out there. Because I think a little bit different than some other jobs is in COLA and in journalism, once you get out there, there's kind of no hand-holding. There's not time to say, hey, this is actually, we do things different on this spreadsheet. We need you to go interview this athlete, this player, this politician, whatever, and be able to turn around the story in 90 minutes and figure out how to file. And if you don't have Wi-Fi, like you better find a Starbucks or McDonald's nearby. And so just kind of having that real world experience, I think makes such a big difference because I had some awesome journalism professors and loved my time hanging out in Ham Smith, that beautiful building on campus. But I think there's only so much of sitting in a classroom talking about interviewing and building sources before you kind of just have to do it and learn that way.
So with the Inquirer, with the Globe, with Nesson, was there any sort of one experience that stood out as particularly formative that you learned a lot from when you were with those media companies?
Oh, a million. I learned how to embarrass myself. I was once in a Philadelphia 76ers locker room, and this is me showing up not knowing a single 76ers player and just kind of looking up at the lockers and seeing a guy sitting below, I think it was Drew Holiday was on the nameplate. So I went up and started interviewing him as if he was Drew Holiday, the point guard. Like, hey, tell me about your passing game. And so he's doing that a little bit. We get 3 or 4 questions deep. And finally he says, hey, I'm not Drew Holiday, right? I'm like, oh my God, I had no idea. I'm so sorry. So it's stuff like that where you could, you make yourself an idiot a little bit and you learn a little bit from that. Showing up at Philadelphia Eagles training camp and just seeing how the best reporters there developed relationships with players and figured out what was going on with the team that maybe the coaches didn't want you to know or the general manager didn't want you to know. How you learn all of that was super important. And then when you look at the Globe, it was fun just to be in the newsroom and see how the newspaper came together every night and how Dan Shaughnessy's column arrived and who edits it and that whole process. So seeing all of that was invaluable.
And were they good mentors to you, sort of the other journalists that were at those companies? Did they kind of take you under their wings and say, look, we'll show you the ropes?
For sure. I think that's another kind of surprise that I had when comparing internships with COLA students and, not to keep picking on business and I'm sure the fine operation that they run there, but coming back and talking to my friends, it was business. I don't know. I kind of had a team leader, I guess, and we'd have lunch every now and then, but that was about it. Whereas everybody, I think, who I knew from a journalism background or went into editing at a book publishing company or something like that, they all got great experience from the people actually doing the jobs every day who, for whatever reason, I guess I could have some theories, but I don't know for sure, but it just seemed like in those fields, people really were willing to take you under their wing and show you how the job is done and why it's done a certain way. And I think a large part of it could just be that, there's not really a textbook for knowing how to go into a locker room full of millionaire professional athletes and figure out where to stand, what to do. How do you start talking to a player? How do you, do you just come out and ask the pressing question? Do you saddle up to them, get to know their background, their college, their family life? So it's just a job that you kind of have to learn on the fly a little bit. And thankfully, there were so many people willing to kind of take you under their wing.
In this setting, I'm asking you questions, but most of your work is asking other people questions. How do you develop a list of questions to ask? Is it spontaneous? Obviously it depends on the situation, but just generally speaking, how do you craft that piece of your work?
Yeah, well, this is definitely weird for me. I prefer being on the other end of this and getting to ask the questions. I think I try to at least have a rough idea of where the conversation's going to go, and we'll have a few things jotted down in a notepad just in case what hits the fan, and I'm really stretching. I can kind of revert back to that as a cheat sheet. But ideally, for the interviews that go well, whether it's a player, a coach, whoever it is, the ones that go well, I kind of have that first question. We get to that, and then I don't even look back at my notes because they say something about yeah, my time at Michigan with Jim Harbaugh. Oh, what was that like? And then that leads to something else and something else. And then, whenever you walk away, sometimes I think you're kind of wondering, was that a good interview? Was that not? Did I get something there? And kind of without failure, the ones where I'm looking back at my notes and then this question, then this question, those are the ones that don't tend to go very well. The ones that turn into more of a conversation are the ones that, I walk away feeling like, okay, I can tell this guy's story. There's really something here that went well.
And some like all adults, some people are more forthcoming when they are posed with questions, and others are not. How do you handle athletes and coaches and others that don't want to talk, that have very little to say, or maybe even don't want to, don't really like journalists? They're suspicious of them. How do you handle that component?
So I fortunately didn't encounter a ton of that until recently. I moved along with my family from Minnesota to New England. And of course, that leads to covering the Patriots. And so I was kind of fascinated to see what it was going to be like to cover Bill Belichick. Is he as gruff as you see in the press conferences? Is he as terse? Is he as unwilling to cooperate as all of that seems? And so far, 1 year in, the answer is a resounding yes. He's not like some other coaches I had. You could text him on the side and be like, hey, here's why I asked this or that, or what did you mean by this? There is none of that with Bill Belichick. What you see is very much what you get. And so I think it's important to develop relationships around that person, as few as they may keep, in Belichick's case, who very much values familiarity. And so it's definitely not always easy, but I think that there are ways to go around it. And that's where it helps to build relationships in the locker room and be able to, sit next to a guy and chat a little bit off the record. Like, hey, what was practice like today? Was Bill any different today? Or in the case of this season, like, what the hell happened on that final play in Las Vegas? Like, can you tell me anything more on that? Because the head coach isn't going to go there. So there are ways around it, but it's, I'd say it's definitely more difficult, the current setup now in New England, as opposed to what I had with the Minnesota Vikings.
Let's go back to your time in Minnesota. You're not from there, right? It's not a team that you grew up following, whereas you're from New Hampshire. You followed the Patriots growing up. What was it like to be sort of a beat writer for a team that you have to kind of immerse yourself into, that you don't have a connection to, or that you don't necessarily, this is a different situation where you're with a team that's kind of a stranger, but maybe that's a good thing, I imagine, in some ways too.
It was good and bad. There were definitely times that I wished I knew more of the history and didn't have to stop someone the first time that they talked about Fran Tarkenton, and I was like, who's Fran Tarkenton? So there's some pros and cons, and kind of learning the scar tissue of what it's like to be around a franchise that has never won a Super Bowl, and get to know all of that. But I left UNH and got to choose. I was lucky because of the internships that I had done in the past to either be an intern at the Los Angeles Times or the Minnesota Wild, which is the NHL team in Minnesota, the beat writer for the St. Paul Pioneer Press there. Chose the St. Paul Pioneer Press just because I wanted to dive right into it. But I did that leaving New Hampshire, kind of thinking two things. One, it's just so hard in the Boston media to come in as a college student and start covering the Red Sox or the Patriots. There's so many people who want to do it, that I just figured it might be wise to go out, show that you can do it elsewhere, and then eventually try to come back. But loved Minnesota so much that 10 years later, it was not a slam dunk when I got offered this, that I was going to say yes and go back to New England because we loved Minnesota that much. But going there were all sorts of eye-opening parts of just learning about a whole nother area of the country where, wait a second, for 6 months out of the year, we don't see 30 degrees. Like it's, I'm here in Foxboro right now, it's 40 degrees and my wife and I are still baffled as we get to go outside in a sweatshirt. So there was some learning to be done with getting to know the new fan bases and the history, all of that, because grew up here in New England and watched, from the start of basically the Bledsoe era to a second dynasty forming, and then to go out and try to refamiliarize myself with something completely different took some time, and to learn the history of, starting with hockey, so of the Minnesota Wild, which leads to the North Stars, which leads to why did the North Stars leave, and how did Minnesota become so hockey obsessed beyond just that it's freezing and there's frozen ponds. So for sure a learning experience on the move out there.
So you get to New England and you're covering the team you are familiar with. As you just said, you grew up watching the Patriots, and I'm a little older than you, so I remember a time before Bledsoe when they weren't good at all. They did get to the Super Bowl, but it didn't go too well against the Bears. So there was a whole era where the team was really just futile. It was one of the worst franchises around, and of course that changed with Robert Kraft. The Patriots, though, are known as being really tight-lipped, right? They don't share anything. They have that reputation. It's associated with their success, but lately, of course, they haven't had that same kind of success. So I think there's some more scrutiny about that tactic. Are you surprised that the Patriots are sort of where they are now? You're back covering the team the last few years, that they're kind of, and obviously you follow them more closely than I do, but it seems as if they're kind of on a treadmill, right? They're sort of like, they're okay, right? They're good. They're not great. They're not bad. They're not going to get a top draft pick. They play in a division where certainly the Bills, I think everybody would agree, are a better team. The others are, there's maybe a little bit more room to play. But, what's your sense of the team as it is now, coming off a dynasty with Brady, and now Mac Jones? It's sort of, again, they're okay or good.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I wasn't surprised that they struggled in 2020. I think there were a lot of reasons for that. You lose Brady for the first time. You're discovering what life is going to be like in the post-TB12 era. So that part wasn't shocking. And then I think what they did last season made sense in the trajectory. Here comes the rookie quarterback. All right, life is changing. We're getting back to normal. We're going to beat a playoff team every year and start competing with the Bills, even if they're a little bit better than us. It was this last season that was the more shocking turn of events, in that Josh McDaniels leaves. And I think one of the things that I didn't realize is just how much Bill Belichick values familiarity. To him, that is the holy grail. He's done it a certain way for dozens and dozens of years. And so when Josh McDaniels left and he loses a lot of his offensive coaching staff, he could have either hired somebody new that he wasn't that familiar with, that, was kind of the next young up and coming guy. But what gives him pause is that he didn't want to spend time teaching those coaches, essentially coaching those coaches on, here's how we do things here. We teach cover 3 defense or whatever this way, and we want the safety over here, even though you've done it a little bit different. And so to him, the idea of bringing in Joe Judge and Matt Patricia, 2 guys that he knows very well, even if their resumes would indicate they were not very familiar with the offensive side of the ball, to him, that was more intriguing on offense than going and hiring some young hotshot or whoever the other candidate would have been. Obviously, that did not work. I would imagine most people on here saw the season and saw that the offense got worse, and the offensive line got worse, and Mac Jones got worse. So now, today, we learned this morning that he's bringing in Bill O'Brien as the offensive coordinator, which, again, tracks with everything that we know about him in terms of his valuing familiarity. He wasn't going to go get, Sean McVay's latest assistant coach or something. And I think his bet is, Bill O'Brien, I don't need you to give me the 3rd best offense in the league like we had with Tom Brady, or the 1st best offense, whatever. I'm going to have the defense playing well. I'm going to get the special teams better. If we just have an average offense, we're going to be right back there winning a lot of games. And so I think because of that, because of how good Belichick is on defense, I don't think the Patriots are ever going to bottom out as long as he is here and be a 3-win team looking at a top 5 pick and the Heisman Trophy winning quarterback that they could draft. The question is, if they're not going to bottom out, how high is the ceiling without Tom Brady? I think we've all seen that, at least in the last 3 years, it hasn't been as high. And I think, when you look around and watch playoff games this last weekend and this upcoming weekend, it really underscores, yeah, your head coach is super important. It's good to have a good owner, as the Patriots do. But kind of the most important thing that you can have right now in the NFL is a really good quarterback. And if you don't have a top 5, 6, 7 quarterback, you're just going to have a really hard time finding consistent success and, competing for where the Patriots think they should be competing. And so now, this is kind of life for the rest of the NFL, of that hamster wheel circling until you land on that quarterback. We saw it with Kansas City cycling through a bunch of different quarterbacks, and then you land on Mahomes, and oh my God, now they're the new Patriots in the AFC Championship game every year. So we'll see. Belichick wants to do it this way and bet that his defense and special teams will be good enough if the offense is just average. But I don't know. I guess we'll just see how high that ceiling is.
In the press conferences with Belichick, sometimes, he'll answer questions with one word. I think some might describe it as rude. Is that talked about by those covering the team? That, you just don't see. Not all coaches are friendly, but sort of the type of responses he has, and obviously when he won 6 Super Bowls, it's different than giving those answers now, where they're not a Super Bowl team. How much, and also A, is it discussed, and B, adjusting from covering the Vikings to the Patriots, how was that? Just sort of that first press conference where something like that happened.
So I covered the Vikings, as you mentioned, where the new head coach there is Kevin O'Connell. Used to be a backup in New England, young guy, affable, super talkative. I had only covered him for maybe 6 months because he was a new head coach. And yet he was so personable and good to deal with it. He still knew everybody's name. And, if you asked a question, hey, Chad, I don't really know what you mean there. Can you clarify, or something like that, to the point where my last day in Minnesota, I show up and he kicks off his press conference. And this is kind of uncomfortable, but he kicks it off saying, thank you to me for covering the team. We've known each other for 6 months. I've never even covered a game that he coached in. So it's a little uncomfortable how out of his way he went to, like, thank you so much for your time, Chad. We wish you all the best in New England. And then my first press conference, so I go from that to drive across the country. 3 days later, I'm at Patriots training camp, and over, he's dismissing questions about who the offensive play callers. We're not getting into that. That's not important. That we're not big on titles. And that was kind of my wake up moment to what Bill Belichick was going to be like, to which I would say a couple of things. One, it's not as bad as that makes it sound. For every we're on to Cincinnati, or whatever his latest phrase was, he does give a lot of insightful answers that, even if they're short and spoken very softly, barely catching the microphone, they tend to be revealing, and you can kind of get a sense of how he feels about certain players, which, as a beat writer, is all I'm looking for. I don't need 45-minute answers on why long snapping is the way that it is, as he can sometimes do. But just let us know what you think of certain situations of guys, and that's great. So I think there's less, it's not quite as hard as I thought it would be. There's less of the snapping, even though the snapping and the snippiness does tend to go viral, and, kind of was at times you're not prepared for it. Like Thanksgiving night in Minnesota, I asked a question that I barely remember what it was, something about, I think there was a Hunter Henry call. He was diving for a touchdown. It got overturned. And I just asked him about that in the post-game press conference, and he snapped right back at me. And so, you're the reporter, you should be asking the ref, or whatever, however he phrased it. And so that was my first time kind of being on the receiving end, and life moves on. I didn't think much about it. And I'm upstairs writing my story after in the press box in Minnesota. And I start to look at my phone, and all my college buddies from UNH and everywhere else, like, we were watching the press conference. I was, hey, you? Like, yeah. So that was kind of my other wake up moment to what that was like.
Well, it's got to happen to everyone in that room eventually, right? It's a rite of passage. So, that was a good question. It was a good question. It was a fair question to ask.
One of the Globe people who have been there for decades came up to me after and kind of smacks me on the back. He's like, "Hey, you're officially a Patriots writer now." I'm like, all right, perfect.
Well, we have a couple questions in the Q&A, and for anyone watching this, please do ask. I'll go to the one most relevant to what we just talked about. The question is there anyone in the press pool that's sort of the Belichick whisperer? Is that a goal for Chad or among his reporting peers to crack that tough exterior? Obviously, you don't have to say if there is that person, but just in general, is that something is that a goal? Do people talk about trying to be somebody that he actually confides in, if there is anyone?
I think there's one or two people. Tom Curran jumps out, and Karen from the Herald jump out, mainly because they have covered him basically since the very beginning. They both, I think, wouldn't mind me sharing that they have gone through ups and downs, and at times they'll completely block them out because of something they've written or said. But he appreciates seniority and people who have done it for a long time. And so because those two have been there basically since the beginning of the Belichick era, if they ask a certain question, it may not get quite the negative reaction as if somebody like me asked the question. So it's certainly beneficial to have those people, especially after losses and towards the end of the season when things weren't going well. I don't know if it's necessarily a goal to be that person. I think I've got several decades to go before I could potentially become that person, just because of how much he values, seeing the same faces every day, and perhaps doesn't appreciate those who, like me, have only flown in after 2 dynasties and whatnot. So I would say that certainly exists. If you're watching a Belichick press conference and you see one of those two ask a question, you might just watch and see if you think his answer is a little more affable than what he might give elsewhere.
Yeah. Couple career questions. Philip Perry says, can you tell us about the challenges of getting into sports journalism and some tips or recommendations for those who may be looking to write about sports and athletics after graduation?
So, I mean, super challenging in the sense of this is an industry, for better or worse, that tons of people want to get into, and that there just aren't that many jobs. I think scrolling Twitter right before this, I saw the Washington Post was having some layoffs today. And so super, super challenging. And yet I would still recommend it in terms of, I often get asked, would you recommend me going into this? And it's kind of hard because part of you wants to say, look, it's going to be a grind. The salary's not going to be incredible, at least to start. It's going to be hard to even find a job. It's going to take years to work your way up. But if you like it enough to do all of those things, it can be an awesome career if you're interested in telling other people's stories and, trying to find out as much as you can and get the scoop on things. Or if, I think it all just comes back to telling stories. At the end of the day, whether you're in covering politics or sports or breaking news or whatever, it's just telling the stories of people's lives. In the instance of what I cover, the stories of their lives are football coaches with houses on Nantucket and 6 Super Bowls. But I think as far as how you get into it, and I don't want to make it seem like I'm just beating in on what was the topic of this. It honestly, truly, truly is internships. That is the sole reason that I'm here right now. That's the way that I progressed. If I didn't have those internships, I wouldn't have started covering the Minnesota Wild, which means I wouldn't have covered the Vikings, and then wouldn't have jumped to the Athletic, which brought me here. If I hadn't done those, if I hadn't just answered phone calls at the Union Leader about high school sports, this probably, is not where I'm sitting. So it sounds perhaps kind of too easy for this topic, but it really legitimately was internships.
And a willingness to go anywhere, right? I think that's something that it seems as if, you've been to Philadelphia, you've been to Minnesota. A lot of people when they graduate college, they want to be in the same geographic area where either they're from or where the school is. And you went to places that are not familiar. So I think I would imagine kind of telling journalism students, be willing to try something new.
For sure. It was not easy, and it would have been my preference to stay here, but in a field where there's just fewer and fewer jobs and more people that want those jobs, you kind of have to be willing to be flexible if it's something that you truly want to chase after. And that could lead you to St. Paul, Minnesota, where you know zero people. But a decade later, those are some of my best friends, and we're in my wedding, and I wouldn't trade moving to Minnesota for anything.
Michael Randall asks, what advice would you give current TNH staff as they look towards journalism careers after Durham? Similar advice?
Similar advice. Hell yeah, pumped that there's some TNH people on here. That's awesome. I do think that the newsroom has moved since I was a student there. I think last time I went, it was shifted to a different spot, but I'd love to, if you're one of those TNH staff, shoot me a DM, hit me up. I'd love to come back and see the newsroom now that it's my off season, chat with you guys and hang out and just see the place and see what you guys are doing. But it's a lot of the same advice, both, do as much as you can at TNH, because that did a ton for me. And then specifically within that, I would say try to every semester do one story there that you're really proud of. Like, working at the college newspaper is a rare chance where you don't have a quota of a certain number of stories that you have to do, or if we're being honest, the deadline isn't quite as strict as maybe it is some other places. So make sure that you come away with a story every semester that you're proud of, that you spend some time on, that you talk to a lot of people, whether it's a feature, whatever it may be, something that you can then take to these internships and show them like, yeah, I can do this because I have done it. Look at this player I did, a feature I did on this hockey player, or on the president of, the liberal arts school, whatever it may be. To have those clips that you can bring, that is kind of how you get these internships. At least, the people who hired me for those internships told me it was because of those clips. So I know that there's an allure maybe to cover every game and stuff like that, but just make sure that you have a few clips that you can walk away with and be proud of, and can help you land an internship.
So Julie Spack is interested in knowing, did you always enjoy writing going back to elementary and middle school? You mentioned you were an English major. When did you get the journalism bug? Is this something that kind of, when did you know it? And what were your experiences writing elementary and middle school and high school?
I wouldn't say have like a writing bug, or I hate to admit this, but I wasn't like the biggest reader, but I did love just picking up a newspaper and reading stories in the paper. And so I ended up getting a job at the Union Leader in New Hampshire because I was working at Stop and Shop, pushing carts and bagging groceries, and up in the break room reading the Union Leader, just trying to kill 20 minutes, probably with a chocolate milk or something at 16, 17 years old. They were hiring, it said, for somebody to just answer phones. I think it was probably a bad day. I had maybe some customers who weren't thrilled, or the double bag broke, whatever the case may be. I'm flipping in there, and this is back in classifieds day, looking for a new job. I see that the Union Leader's hiring, and so applied to that and called the sports editor, I think every Monday for 6 straight Mondays, until he finally was like, whatever, I just want this kid off my back. I'll let him answer phones from the Londonderry High basketball coach and take down a paragraph on that. And so that is kind of how it all started for me. I liked to write a little bit. I wrote like the family Christmas letter and stuff like that. But I would say it's kind of a love-hate relationship with writing. There are times that I feel like I've got great interviews and now it's time to write. And God, this is the worst part, where now I've got to actually take all their good stuff and not screw it up somehow. So I like to write, but I think what I like more is talking to people, doing interviews, getting to know them. And then when it comes to the writing part, for me, it's just like, how can I not screw this up?
Julie's also interested in knowing, did you write about things other than sports when you were at the New Hampshire?
I did a little bit. I ended up somehow fooling enough people into letting me be the managing editor and then executive editor there. And so that lent itself to, this was President Huddleston at the time, going and doing, conversations with him and interviews with him on state of the university and where things were going and whatnot. So I did a little bit. I do think even if you're willing and want to get into sports, it's valuable to do other news, both in terms of helping just your interview skills, but also just learn how to write stories other than a game story. So I did a little bit. I still kind of wish that I did a little bit more of it, but it was just a little for me.
So a couple of NFL coverage type questions. Dr. Stacy Feiner asks, before a team, quote, fires, end quotes, a coach for underperformance, do they first get a coach for themselves? Is the coach's self-awareness ever a topic of discussion, or viewed as an opportunity to win more? So I think that I interpreting this as the decision to fire a coach, sort of what goes into that. And have you seen a coach firing? You certainly seen coaches turnover. Have you seen a firing of a coach, and what was that experience like covering it?
I saw, and this was kind of bizarre, when I was in Minnesota, this is the 2018 season. The Vikings are just coming off of an NFC championship game. They hire the quarterback's coach from the Eagles, who of course just beat the Patriots in the Super Bowl, not to bring up bad memories for people, but they bring in the young hotshot without kind of vetting him. He does not get along well with the older, grumpier Mike Zimmer, who's a lot like Belichick. And you could sense throughout the year and hear some rumblings that it wasn't going great. And, you know, it kind of got to the awkward point in season where we've got to ask the offensive coordinator now, like, hey, have you seen this? Do you think this could happen? Whatever, which is super awkward. And then after a game in Seattle, when things went really poorly, I'm down in the locker room. And of course, the story is like the offense continues to be bad. Is the coach going to make an in-season change? And I come out and the offensive coordinator is sitting at just like this picnic bench, old table, I think meant for people to just take breaks while working at the stadium, eating a pizza alone, wearing headphones. Is like the saddest sight ever. And that was kind of the giveaway to me, like, oh boy, it's happening. The next morning, 7 hours later, he was fired. As for whether coaches kind of coach themselves, I think that probably doesn't happen enough. In terms of, if your question is, does the coach say, why isn't this working out? Like, am I to blame that the offensive coordinator isn't teaching this the way that I want it to, or whatever? I don't think that happens enough. I think you're just starting now, especially with some of the younger coaches, to see that. There have been a few who recognized along the way, like, yeah, maybe I need to spend more time with that coach. As we talked about earlier with Belichick, when you bring in a new coach, it's not just having that guy coach the rest of the team. You've got to coach that coach to do things the way that you want, and get them on board that way. And so I don't think enough coaches do that. There are a ton of egos, I have learned, especially in football coaching, and everybody thinks that they've got it all figured out for right or wrong. And if there wasn't success, I tend to sense from coaches that there's blame for other people and perhaps not enough looking in the mirror. But that's just the sense that I get anyway.
Dr. Feiner, as a follow-up, do coaches get a psychologist or their own coach to get their head back in the game, to the extent that you know?
Not very often at all. I covered Mike Zimmer, who lost his wife while he was a coach, and talked very later about briefly working with a psychologist and therapist. But he even said, I wish I did more. It's kind of, unfortunately, I would say, in the mentality of like, hey, just rub some sand on that wound, get back out there. You're a football coach, go grind, be in the office at 6 a.m., still be there at 9 p.m., sleep in your office if that's what it takes, work through, just study film more, and that will solve your problem. So there are very, very few who do that. There probably should be more.
Bob Rooney has a question. You mentioned, Chad, that an average offense is being kind of a go-forward philosophy of Bill Belichick without having a top 5 quarterback. Does this imply that the Patriots think the ceiling on Mac Jones is only average? Any thoughts on that?
No, I don't think they think that. I think this season was a wake-up call for how important coaches are in football. I think they're important in every sport, but especially in the NFL when scheme matters so much. Mac Jones is the perfect example of, you have a very good offensive coordinator. He comes in and outplays Trevor Lawrence, who has a really bad coach, at least at the NFL level. And then those two things flip, and Mac Jones is the guy who doesn't have an established coach, and Trevor Lawrence is the guy with an established coach. Well, suddenly Trevor Lawrence is ascending, and the guy who looks like he'll be with Joe Burrow for years to come, and Mac Jones is suddenly looking like the guy you're questioning if he's going to be around in 2 years. So coaching matters so much that I think they want to get him back with a competent offensive coordinator, a guy who's done it, a guy who knows what he's doing. And I think Belichick is very content to let this season play out. Mac, I'm going to give you what you need with the coaching staff. I'm going to go try to get you weapons this offseason. I think they're going to look really hard at another wide receiver. And then once you have those things, like the ball's in your court, Mac, you put together a good 2023 season, great. We're going to have you around for a while. If you don't, then we'll be studying who's to come in the next draft.
So is Bailey Zappi the only competition for the spot, or do you see them bringing in maybe an established quarterback who's looking to sort of resurrect his career that might be considered a rival to Mac?
I don't think they're going to have a rival to Mac. I think it's the Mac Jones show, and they're going to continue forward with that. There was some fun earlier discussing whether Tom Brady might come back or have any interest coming back. I don't think that's going to happen. It'd be an awesome story. It'd be incredible from my perspective. Hell yeah, let's do it. But I don't see that happening. And I think the keys are firmly given to Mac Jones right now. This is your show. Let's see what you do. And your play this upcoming season is going to dictate what happens. Bailey Zappi is just here to support you. We're not going to give many of your first team snaps. It's you, Mac, and let's ride.
An attendee wonders if there were any faculty at UNH that had a particularly great impact on your career at UNH or your professional career, if you sort of remember any kind of having a big impression.
For sure. I hesitate to say one to leave out others, but I will anyway. Tom Haynes came in, I think, my junior year. He had just taken a buyout, I believe, from the Boston Globe and wanted to basically give back his time and just talk about how he got to the Globe and the stories that he told and the ways that he did it. Came in and I think kind of just provided a spark. He was immediately became the supervisor at TNH and, was helpful in so many ways in talking about resumes and how to build them and how to land jobs and what these people are looking for, and stressed what we talked about earlier of having one very good clip that you can show people to say, like, look, if you give me the time, I can do this. But more than anything, I love just kind of sitting in his office, or he come to TNH and sitting and having a cup of coffee and hearing stories about what life was like, especially in the heyday of the Globe when he was sent across the country. I think he's now on a sabbatical and traveling for a book that he's writing. But he had an awesome impact, and we'll always appreciate Tom for that.
Another attendee wonders, what's a story that you've been particularly proud of? What is one that represented the biggest challenge, and what would be your big get? What would be your dream interview going forward?
Oh boy. Well, right after I said you should have a story that you're really proud of, now all of a sudden I'm trying to think of one. I did a story earlier this year on one of the things that I was fascinated by was sitting in training camp, watching these guys practice multiple, times a day, really. The offensive linemen all have their hands taped up, like their fingers together. And so I was talking to one of them. I was like, hey, can you just tell me why that is? And he's like, oh, I'll show you. So he unravels the tape and he's got like his pinky finger sticking out like this. And so then I thought, well, here's a story. I should ask all these players, like, what's your craziest story of having a finger get bent? So I started talking to a couple of them, go back to my editor, tell him about it. He's like, look, I think you're thinking too small here. Don't just ask the Patriots that. Like, let's go find the guys in the NFL who have the craziest stories of fingers, hands, nails getting bent, twisted, pulled, broken, whatever. And so I had a ton of fun just talking to 6 or 7 guys, fingers bent every which way, about how that happened. Like, what is it like when your finger goes completely sideways? When did you know that it wasn't going back? Because for some of them, like it happened once and it happened again. And eventually, like your finger just sticks out. And so they were all great sports, cracking jokes. Like one of the guys lives in Green Bay, Wisconsin. And I was like, yeah, it's totally fine 6 months out of the year. And then 6 months are hell because I can't wear winter gloves because of my fingers. And another guy was talking about how pockets are his nightmare because he goes to put his hands in pockets and his fingers get stuck. So that was a story I had a lot of fun with. I don't know what a big get would be. I've talked to Bill Parcells a few times, and I've always wanted to go just hang out with him in Florida where he lives now and bets on horses and fishes and kind of just, maybe that would be selfish for my own enjoyment, just to hear stories of life in the NFL in the 80s and 90s and, having Belichick and Sean Payton and all the great coaches that he's had work under him. So that would be a fun one, I think, to do.
Yeah, Parcells would certainly have a lot to say. And given what he knows about the Patriots and his relationship with Kraft and Belichick, I imagine the interesting nuggets of information you could get from that would be pretty good.
I've heard he's a wine drinker too, so maybe after a couple glasses.
Well, really another Patriots, Drew Bledsoe has a vineyard, right? I mean, he has his whole
yep.
thing, so.
Combine that, I guess.
Yeah, right. Right. Everyone's happy in that scenario. The Eileen has a question. At The Athletic, do you work closely with Jeff Howe? And if so, how has he helped you in your career development and in getting the best opportunities for sports stories?
Yeah, so I get to work with two people at The Athletic who I've read for a while and appreciated. Jeff Howe is one of them. I got this offer, I think, in June. And the first person I called was Jeff to be like, hey, tell me about it. I'm super happy in Minnesota, like covering the Vikings, like my life here. Our family's happy here. Kids great here. Why should I move? What's good? What's bad? Is Belichick as difficult as it seems? So loved talking to him. He's been great too in terms of I can text him and say, hey, I don't have this guy's phone number, like especially a former player. I wasn't here for that. Can you give me this guy's number? He's been awesome for that. Thankfully, because he's so good, I haven't had to worry too much about stepping on his toes with stories, just because he's doing a lot more national stories now. But consider him a friend. He's very good. And then the other guy that I've had a blast working with at The Athletic that perhaps longtime Boston sports fans would know is Steve Buckley, the longtime Boston Herald columnist. I think he's 67 and just has unbelievable stories. He's one of like three people with him, Shaughnessy, and one other who have covered every Boston sports team championship since 2000. And so the stories he has of late nights with Shaughnessy after Super Bowls and whatnot, or conversations with Kraft, or visits to John Henry's house, or whatever the case may be, like it has just been so much fun for me to kind of get to hang out with the people that I grew up reading. Shaughnessy too. Shaughnessy still goes to a couple Patriots games, and he's the friendliest guy to afterwards, especially for me, barely knowing anybody, come over and be like, hey, we're going to this bar. I got the credit card. We'll open it up. We'll have a good time. And so to have a beer with him and swap stories has been a highlight too.
Well, Shaughnessy and Buckley are legends, of course. So that's a great opportunity to be able to kind of get to know them and have them mentor you. I mean, just that kind of advice will pay huge dividends. Julie Spack wonders, are Zappy and Mac friends?
They are. There was some awkwardness kind of middle of the season when Zappy Mania was happening and, Mac was on the field listening to Zappy chants. But that notwithstanding, they're very friendly together in the locker room. They spend a ton of time together. There's not much bitterness. I think it will be interesting if, despite the offensive coordinator change, Mac Jones starts the season struggling. Maybe the Zappy chants start again. And then at that point, what is the relationship like? I don't know, because Zappy wants to play. Like, remember when Tom Brady was here, he used to say that the backup quarterbacks, he didn't want them coming in and acting like they were going to be the starters, even though that's how he was. Bailey Zappe's not here because he wants to be a backup quarterback forever. So if Mac struggles early, I'll be curious to see how that changes. But at least for right now, they're definitely friendly together.
Yeah, that could change, right? Let's see how the preseason goes. If how the new offense clicks with them. Brendan Callahan wonders, would you say in sports journalism, a knowledge of the sport you're covering is essential to succeed in the field?
Surprisingly, no. I wouldn't say essential. It helps, and then the longer that you do it, the more that you learn. Like, I thought I knew about hockey, and then talking to some of the coaches afterward, you quickly realize, like, I don't know anything. It's helpful, and if you do it long enough, it'll happen. But I think you can get away with it by just telling stories of people and their lives and their paths to this spot. If you can tell stories, you can cover anything. And so if you're good at doing that, you can get away with it. I will be the first person to say I didn't know everything about hockey when I was covering hockey. I don't know everything about football now. But if you're also okay with admitting what you don't know and okay with telling a player, a coach, whomever, like, this could be a really dumb question, but when you're doing this, whatever, why do you do that? If you're okay with that, you can totally get by. And even, I would say, do a good job without, having mastered that sport or whatever.
Well, we're running short on time, so let's do some speed round. Edward White, is there any chance at all that Tom Brady returns to New England? Seems like a long shot.
You're right that it seems like a long shot. This may hurt to say. I think it's more likely that he goes to the New York Jets than the Patriots.
Wow.
The Jets are not going to be the favorite. They're not the betting favorite or anything, but it's more, which would be so weird and so bizarre. I can't stop thinking about how weird it would be. But I think there's a better chance of that than New England.
Wow. Wow, that would be something else. Tom Brady in a Jets uniform. I don't know if that could ever. I mean, when Johnny Damon went to the Yankees, he was never forgiven.
Yeah, that would test loyalty, I think. And
yeah, I don't know.
Because that Belichick kind of hates more than any other. It would be awkward on so many fronts.
I can't see him go to the Jets, but you have a much better pulse.
I'm only saying that's like 5-10%, and the Patriots are 1%.
Yeah. Okay. Dr. Finder, Chad, do you notice that the social expectations of fans changing the culture on teams?
Fascinating question. I'm going to say yes. I would have said no prior to going elsewhere. I spent 10 years in Minnesota, where they are super passionate fans, and yet passionate of teams that have not won anything. They haven't had a championship in the 4 major pro sports since the Twins won in 91. So there is a large group of the fan base that has never seen a championship in any sport. And yet there's, I think, perhaps a culture of, maybe it's the Minnesota Nice coming out, whatever it is. They are perhaps a little bit willing to, celebrate success if success is just making it to the playoffs. And that does not exist here. I've been reminded in my 6 months, whatever it is, back in New England. And strange as it sounds, I do think that pressure of, even if you go to the playoffs and lose, there's still an angry fan base. I think that ratchets things up and can change decision-making within the team, and in some cases lead to better victories.
The Dr. Viner notes, by the way, I'm in Cleveland facing the Deshaun Watson fiasco. So certainly that's a big part of, and the doctor says that your answers are so insightful. Julie Spack wants to know, how do you handle a player who is mad at you?
I'm perhaps a little awkward by nature, and the few times that it happens, you kind of just have to stand there and take it. I'll answer whatever questions they have about why I wrote something the way that they did. There was one player in Minnesota who I went to dinner with, thought we had an awesome conversation. He was saying some kind of wild stuff that I was surprised he was saying. And yet throughout the interview, I kept saying, like, you're good if I quote you on that. Yep, good. And then the story comes out, and surely he got pushback from a coach, agent, whomever, sees me in the locker room and starts yelling, why would you put me in that situation? Why'd you do that? I was like, look, I probably went out of my way to give you outs on this. And so in that situation where I feel like there's nothing I can do because I feel like I did everything right, I kind of just sit there and get yelled at for a few minutes, and if they ask a question, I'll answer it. But other than that, like I think it's respectful, if nothing else, to just stand there and take it, kind of.
Well, this is a good question to close. It's from Michael Randall. What's next? Is there a next chapter that you're aiming for?
Oh man, I don't know if there's necessarily a next. Like, I think the ultimate dream one day, perhaps down the road, somewhere down the line, would be just to only focus on feature stories, and to once a week, once every 2 weeks, however often it is, just sit down with a player, a coach, whomever, and tell their story. And that is, those jobs are getting fewer and fewer because places don't necessarily have the resources to allocate an entire person on their staff to only write 50 times a year or whatever it would be. But something like that, or one day down the road, maybe doing a book of some sort, would be enticing as well. But for now, I'm only 6 months into being back with the Patriots, so I'll continue to embrace this and what should be kind of a wild, changing offseason.
Well, Chad, it's a great way to close. Thank you for being part of this discussion. Thanks to everyone watching and participating, and Dan Raposa and Jen Woodside and so many others for making this event happen. I hope it was informative for all watching, and please keep UNH in mind and all the great things that are going on at our university, including the internship program that Chad talked about, how instrumental it was for his career. And if you're in a position where you can offer a student an internship, please do so. Please make it paid as well if possible, because it really makes a difference for careers. And I think Chad's is a great example of that. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Chad, talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.